So we're talking about faith in public. And one of the things that's like ever present right now, right, is the election. Election talk is everywhere, and it's making everybody in the United States, and I would dare say places around the world, anxious, right? Because no matter who wins and who loses this election, some people will be relieved, and some people will be upset, and some people will feel reassured, and some people will feel afraid. So how do we, in this moment, think about becoming a people of peace? What does that mean? And, not to mention, right, we are all living our own lives. There are other things going on in the world in addition to the election. Like, I dare say, you guys are navigating midterms. They're kind of ongoing at this point in the semester, right? And so it would be really natural to worry about your classes, worry about your grades, right? Some people are sick. They're dealing with illness. I had a friend come to my house last week because she had just lived through Hurricane Helene. And North Carolina was decimated, the part where she lived. People didn't have water. They didn't have electricity. Grocery stores were tapped out. And one of the things she shared was that the most disorienting thing was not being able to communicate with anyone. All the power was down, cell towers were down, people didn't know if she was okay. She couldn't talk to people. I mean, she could talk to her neighbors who were within physical distance. So that's happening. What else is happening in the world that we could be anxious about? Well, there are wars, right? And not only is the war in Gaza still going, it's expanding now to Lebanon. And the war in Ukraine, still going on. The war in Sudan, the war in the Republic of Congo, there are wars all over the place. So it seems like we have a lot we could feel anxious about. It's a pretty human experience. So I have to confess that I have always loved the scripture that we read for today. I have always loved it right up until I had to preach about it. Because Paul he kind of makes it sound easy, right? He's like, okay, rejoice in the Lord always. And in case you missed it the first time, again I say, rejoice. Okay. I don't know about you. I don't always feel like rejoicing. So, he talks about praying and petitioning God. I kind of get that. I could sort of roll with that. And he talks about think on good things. And he has a whole list of good things. What's true? What's honorable? What's beautiful? That's helpful. So I want to invite us, I love that we opened worship today with breathing. And any of you who know kind of the work I do at Press House, I work as a health and life coach. So part of what I help students remember to do is take care of themselves, right? And one of the ways we can do that, we can literally calm our central nervous system, is through breathing. I want to talk a little bit about what Paul's writing about and his situation to try and maybe argue back with myself about why what he says is kind of annoying. Okay, so first, I guess it's only fair to note that Paul writes this letter to the Philippians, which is a community he really loves, while he's in prison. He's been imprisoned by the Romans, who at this point anyway are not persecuting every Christian, but some of them, if you make too much wavelengths, right? And so last week, Niato talked about the saints of Selma walking across the bridge and facing down what they knew was going to be brutality, prison, maybe death. And Paul, sitting in prison, says he's not sure if he's going to be released or put to death. So I have to give him like a little, grace, right? Because he's in it. He's not just saying, hey, think good thoughts and it'll all be fine, right? On top of that, something that's easy to miss is that two leaders of the community in Philippi were kind of feuding and arguing, which was sowing a lot of unrest and unease in the community. So just for a minute, think, what would it be like if Niato and Erica were just in it? They were having it out. They were in some public feud. How would it be to come here to worship every week? Awkward. Right? Okay, so real people having disagreements with each other, right? I don't know what it's like for you when with the election. We don't all think alike. I have really serious differences from my family. And I love them. So what does Paul suggest? He says to these two women let me see if I can find the phrase. Hang on. It's a very particular phrase. Be of the same mind in the Lord. So he's telling the two of them, be of the same mind in the Lord. Now, if you're anything like me, you read something like that, and you get the same mind part, he's kind of telling them, get on the same page. But what does it mean to be in the same mind in the Lord? So, there's another little phrase that's tucked into the scripture that we heard today, and to tell you the truth, it's one that I read over all the time. It says, let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Don't worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Okay, what do I read over? The Lord is near. The reason I read that phrase over is because in my mind, I think, okay, Paul's writing in Common Era 61, 60 years or so after the death and resurrection of Jesus, and he's sort of waiting for the second coming. He is literally waiting. He thinks Jesus is near, coming back. So part of my mind just reads over that. The Lord is near. Because I many times read that to mean kind of behave yourselves because Jesus is coming back pretty soon. But when I read it for today, and I read it with this other part, be of the same mind in the Lord, I thought, what does that mean? And I love this hymn that I nearly interrupted. I love this hymn, peace like a river in your soul. Love, joy in your soul. Okay, so now I get to the good part where I get to share a little bit about how I think God helps us out with these things. So, the first thing that I think is true about God is that God is first and foremost relational. A lot of people would say Creator comes first, but I would say the reason God created was because God wanted to be in relationship. And so out of that desire, the universe comes. And people come. And who knows what else God's relating to. And the universe is this set of relationships, molecules and people and energy and physics. God is desiring all of that. What else do I know about God? What do I know to be true? Well, from Christian scripture, that God is qualitatively about love. Okay? So, to get in line with the mind of God, we have to kind of tap into what it means to love, right? Love one another. Now, I'm going to share 3 stories to wrap up that I think begin to illustrate what Paul is pointing to when he's trying to say, A, pray. In all things, when you're encountering midterms, when your friends are fighting, when the election is happening, when wars are happening, pray. And turn your mind to good things. Why? Because we are called to be a people of light, shining light, God's love in the darkness. And what draws people to us? How we live in the world. Okay, so here are the 3 stories. The first one, how many of you have seen the new movie, I say new because there was a first one, the new movie Twister? Okay, some of you. All right. Okay, so the premise of this movie is there's a storm chaser, right? Tornado chaser. The big improvement in the 2024 version over the 1996 version is that this dude tricked out his pickup to have augers that drill into the ground, into the earth, to anchor that puppy down. Okay? So he can park his truck in the path of a storm, of a frickin' tornado, and that truck is anchored with steel augers in the earth. Okay? Image number 1. Story number 2. One of my early years at Press House, we invited Shane Claiborne to come and speak. And I don't know how many of you know who Shane Claiborne is, but he is a Christian activist and a writer, and he is well known in evangelical circles. And I will say there is a lot about his life that I admire. And there are probably things about his theology and the way he understands God I might argue with. I might be in conflict with. But let me tell you about what it was like to meet him. Because when he came to Press House, I had all this stuff in my head that I was thinking, and he was a man who exuded joy. I don't know how, it was palpable. It was visceral. I don't know how to describe to you what it was like, except to say this must have been something like what the vibe Jesus gave out. Because he was joyful. He had this childlike joy. And he was talking about hard things. He was talking about impoverished neighborhoods in Philadelphia and melting down handguns and submachine guns to make into plows, literally, from the metal. And what I remember is not what he said. What I remember is encountering his joy. Now, the third story I'm going to tell you is about a man named A.J. Musty. And I know for sure you have no idea about this guy. He lived in the 20th century, and he actually was in conversation with Martin Luther King Jr. and Bayard Rustin, who were, I hope you know, leaders of the Civil Rights Movement. And he was a Christian pacifist. And he protested every war in which the United States participated throughout the entire 20th century. Every single war. Because he believed that as a follower of Jesus, there was something about peace and love that transcended our arguments, our desires for power, our need to be right. And the story I'm going to share is about late in his life. He was in his early 80s, and legend has it that he stood out in front of the White House every day of the Vietnam War. Whether or not anyone was with him or not, sometimes people were, regardless of the weather. So I imagine him with a little candle. And a reporter asked him, "Mr. Musty, do you really think that standing out here in front of the White House is going to change what the United States government does?" And he said, "I'm not here to change what the United States government does. I am here so that what the United States government does not change me." So who are we called to be? We are called to be people, when we feel anxiety arise, that turn our minds and our hearts to prayer, with the hope that if we can sink our anchor down, there is peace beyond the circumstances of our lives that guard our hearts and our minds. The peace of God is not something we really understand, like in our thinking. It is not something that the world understands. So it is a practice. Paul says there are things we got to do. We got to ask, petition. We've got to turn our minds to a different place. And the hardest thing in relationship to do, trust that there's something there for us when we tap that well.